Hi there. Welcome. This is the first in a conversational series where I talk with friends and acquaintances about this question, which is when did you start to see the pattern, or as we call it, see through the matrix, or see the narrative, or really at least start to understand the outlines that the conventional story just didn't make sense to you anymore? And then what did you decide to do about it? So I'm here with my friend Madhava, who I met during the COVID years. And Madhava is an amazing person. He has a great Substack, which I will link to. He is also an anesthesiologist. And he was an engineer before he went to medical school. And so he's particularly well informed about several aspects of the physical world. And so we'll start with Madhava. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here. And when did you? Yeah, good. When did you first start to kind of feel like the popular story wasn't making sense?
It was October 2017. It's very clear to me, right? I mean, I think for some people, it's sort of a gradual realization that what they've been believing was wrong in some ways. But for me, it was a abrupt jolt. And as you can see, I'm the science advisor for IC 9/11, which is the International Center for 9/11 Justice. And it had to do with that event. And as I said, it was 2017. So 16 years after the event, we were hosting a small dinner with some close friends. And as we were wrapping up, my wife was looking on her phone and she said, this never really made any sense to me. And I said, what are you looking at? And she showed me a video of a what I thought was a casino or a hotel in Las Vegas blowing up.
Oh.
And I said, what's the big deal? And she said, well, this happened in Manhattan on September 11th. And I was stunned because I'd never seen that building before. And of course, your viewers probably know I'm talking about the Salomon Brothers building of World Trade Center 7, also known as World Trade Center 7. It stood about 100 yards away from the North Tower, which is one of the Twin Towers. And it fell. And it didn't fall gradually, it fell abruptly, much like my worldview. It came down like this. And this was a very large building, 47 stories high, about 500 and maybe 600 feet tall. Was not hit by a plane. No one knew about the building, at least I didn't know about the building. And I said, what are we looking at here? She said, I don't know. That's why I'm bringing it to your attention. And so that led to a serious reexamination of what I knew about this perspective, which is the planes hit the buildings, 2 buildings came down, the Pentagon was hit, and there you have it. Brooke, I've got to let the dog back into the house.
Well, go ahead. And my dog's going to bark now because someone just came to the door.
So the very first thing I did, which is perhaps unlike what most people would do, I would expect most people to go to the internet and say, okay, what is this? But I instead went to the official story, the explanation that the National Institute of Standards and Technology gave. And they laid it out in a document called NC Star 1A, the destruction of World Trade Center 7. And I was looking for what I would say every engineer would look for is like, how did you explain what happened? And it was stunning to me that they said it was from a fire. And in order to prove their hypothesis, they built a computer model of the building. And they showed us what the model looked like when they applied their hypothesis, like a fire on the 12th floor, unseated one of the columns, and then it caused this progressive collapse. And here's the thing, is that if I were them, I would have done the same thing. Because you're not going to, build another 47 structure skyscraper and see what happens. You build a computer model. And that would be the best way to prove their hypothesis. And I want to be very clear here is if the model does not behave if the model behaves exactly the way we observed, then your hypothesis is potentially true. There could be a better explanation, but it's still in the running if you to talk about it scientifically. But if the model does not behave in the way we observed, then the hypothesis is wrong. There's no getting around that. That's the scientific method. The model didn't behave the way we observed. It sort of crumpled to one side and then leaned over. But yet they claimed that this was a legitimate explanation for the destruction of this building. And that's when I realized we had a problem, okay? Because the world was buying this story because they're the authority. And what I did next was I went to friends of mine who were structural engineers, one architect, a mathematician, two of them had PhDs from MIT. And I said, look, we've got a problem, right? I mean, let's talk about it. This is basic kinematics. We should be able to either confirm or debunk the story. And they looked at me and they said, well, I don't see a problem with it. And that's when I realized that we had a much, much bigger problem than the fact that our government clearly did not do a rigorous analysis of one of the greatest architectural failures in our history. We had an expert class that could not see what was right in front of them.
Right. Okay. So did your friends read the reports and as to the extent that you had?
No, they were unwilling to read it because they were stuck with, there's no way an anesthesiologist can overturn a group of structural engineers and applied mathematicians that are hired by the government to explain things. So obviously it must be right. And yeah, maybe it looks a little weird and you're bringing up some good points, but are you seriously questioning the 9/11 narrative coming from the government? I mean, obviously you're wrong. I thought more of you, Madhava. Let's be real here, right? We're scientists. And I'm like, yes, we're scientists. Why can't we talk about it? And so that was, I would say that was the turning point for me. And actually my entire life, the trajectory of my life completely went in another direction because I was the director of a medium-sized group of anesthesiologists outside of Boston, living in this gracious house, 2 kids and a wife, a dog. And suddenly I was like, what are we doing in this situation? Does anyone else know about Building 7? And so I would say that was the event.
Yeah. And it's so specific and it's so interesting to me. So this is Madhava's book, which I read several years ago when we met. And then I reread the last couple chapters this week to remind myself of all the details. Because I didn't have TV when 9/11 happened and I heard it on the radio. And I never, as it so happens, I never actually watched videos of it until after 2020. And I think it was possibly your website that showed me the Building 7 video, or it was something else that was happening as everyone after 2020 was like seeing more stuff that didn't make sense. But I was blown away by the explanation in here. The first one, which you give, which is the rubble pile that was left.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
Absolutely.
You want to describe it?
Well, what Brooke is referring to here is the rubble pile of the Twin Towers, which were 100 yards away. And these were structures that were 110 stories, 1,100 feet. And most people believe that they fell because the planes hit and then they just fell down because of, whatever reason they give you, this crush zone or whatever. But the reality is that at ground zero, the rubble pile was no more than a couple stories high. And what that means is, proportionally, if you will, if you had a 10-story building, not so big, but a 10-story building, and it fell and left what the Twin Towers were left with, you would have almost nothing. It would be less than it would be 1/10 of a floor. So it would be 2 feet high. That's pretty much what we had with the Twin Towers. And the question is, where did the building go? Right. Where is all the material? Where are the blocks of concrete? And the reality is that the building didn't fall down. The building disintegrated. Yeah. And, we had the governor of New York, George Pataki at the time, taking around a CNN reporter. And the reporter's like, so, Governor, can you tell us what we're seeing here? And the governor, he was like, well, it's the most amazing thing because there's almost nothing left. And yet Lower Manhattan is covered with a blanket of pulverized concrete 3 inches thick. This building was pulverized.
Right.
And, what are you supposed to make of it? And I would say as a layperson, you'd say, well, a building can crush itself. Look, a building can't crush itself. I'm sorry. How could a building stand on its own to begin with?
Right.
And if you really go into the specifics around the mathematics, the amount of energy it would take to pulverize that much concrete is significantly higher than the potential energy of the building. So there's another source of energy involved. In other words, it's the conservation of energy, one of our basic laws of kinematics. So it should be easily provable to an 11th grade physics class that there was another source of energy that was present in the system. You can't measure it, but you can see by the way the system behaves that there must have been one. And, again, it points to another means of destruction here, which obviously you can go into, but go ahead.
Well, I think, so to me, like that's the most, these series of things that you outline in this book are the most significant, like major obvious things that have been prevented from, or not prevented, but the general public who wasn't interested did not know about them. I never, ever heard anything like the building rubble was, had disintegrated. That makes no sense because I can think about, I'm in a 2-story house. If a tree hits it, how big is, and somehow destroys it, how big is the rubble pile going to be? Obviously more than 2 feet.
Yeah.
And obviously more than 1/10 of, what was the number you gave? So it was 1% about.
Yeah, about 1%.
Yeah.
Maybe 2%, right? 2% of the original height, yeah.
And so the only way, like that and the fires that burned for 3 months. These are interesting events that happened that generally people were not informed about, or if they were informed about, they didn't care to understand what the meaning was.
Correct.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. That's a problem, right? I mean, like, why are we not looking, right? I mean,
right.
and thank you for plugging the book. And I would like to say to your listeners that most of the book, the first 6 chapters, are to prepare the reader for the information about 9/11, because I saw that you just can't go right into 9/11 because you just throw it away.
Right.
And so I tried to lead the reader through a series of vignettes that first will allow the reader to say, here's a mystery. What do you think happened? And notice how you get pushed into a certain conclusion. And along the way, I point out, like, look, here's a mistake you made by assuming this. Here's the mistake you made by concluding that. And they all have a certain commonality. And the thrust of the book really is about harnessing your intuition, which is a very difficult thing to even define. Is there even such a thing? And I believe that there is. But in order to access it, you have to clear your cognitive mind up. And by cleaning it up, I'm saying you have to get rid of all of your biases.
Mm-hmm.
And your biases are prejudices. And the problem is, it's not easy for a mind to recognize its own bias. It's like asking someone with blind spots to point out where their blind spots are. You can't see them. Right. So you have to approach this indirectly. And what I try to do here, as opposed to, maybe others have done, is I say, well, you can't see your biases, but you can recognize sources of bias. Like, what are situations that bring you to a place where bias is potentially in play? And all of those lead to a place where you are unwilling to look at both sides of an argument prematurely.
Right. And so I wrote down, it was 11 sources of bias that you listed in the book, right?
Yeah.
But what's interesting to me about this is, I know now, at least in the liberal arts, when people, and this has probably been true for 10 or 15 years, when academics write papers, they're asked to also understand what all their potential biases are.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw this with a friend who was writing a PhD thesis. She had to define what her potential biases were. So on some level in our academic world, people are working on understanding what their biases are, but it's not being generalized.
No. No, it's not. I mean, it's more insidious than that, because if you try to publish something that runs counter to the accepted narrative, it's not going to get published.
Right.
And that's and scientists are, their academic appointments are based on publishing, so they have to get it into print. And so we have this wholesale redirection, steering of the scientific method towards a certain outcome.
Yeah.
And it reinforces itself with each additional paper. And and this is something I was completely unaware of at the time. I had no idea what was going on with published science at the time. But the 9/11 issue is a very important one. I mean, obviously there are other misdirections at play right now, but the 9/11 one is so big, it
Yeah.
is so huge, and it's so easily seen. If one can simply put down their preconceived notions and potentially where this kind of conversation will lead, and just look at the evidence,
Hmm.
it's so overwhelmingly against the conventional narrative.
Right.
And I would say, the very first question people might ask is, well, so who do you think did it? It's like, look, I don't know. That's you're speculating now. I mean, we can make some better guesses, but it wasn't a couple of a group of people in caves in Afghanistan, that's for sure.
Right.
But before going there, I would say that we know who one of the perpetrators is for sure, like without 100% certainty, and that's the mainstream media. They were absolutely complicit, and we can prove that. Even if you don't want to believe what I'm saying to you about this,
Right.
do people know that at the time when the buildings were coming down, 36 mainstream news sources all reported that there were massive explosions occurring in the buildings.
Right.
They were like, the building's blowing up. The building's blowing up. Look, we heard massive explosions all through the floors. Then we have 118 firefighters, like, New York's finest, saying that, yes, we all witnessed explosions. And why then didn't the commission or the group that was assigned the task of explaining what happened in a technical way, why did they choose not to look for explosive residues?
Right.
Just to rule it out.
Right.
People heard explosions. And that is where the distortion arises, is that they were not rigorous, and it belies what their real mandate was. We believe that they were told to explain how the buildings came down. That's not what their mandate was. And this may be a surprise to you, but their mandate was, can you come up with a hypothesis that may potentially explain why those planes brought those buildings down? It's
Right.
purely speculative.
Right.
And it's potentially a reasonable speculation if you look for explosives first. If you rule out the most, I would say the most reasonable scientific possibility first, and then you can go with whatever hypothesis you want to if you rule that out, but they didn't rule it out. So
Right.
the whole investigation was sent down this path right from the beginning.
Yeah. And so it brings me to this other thing I was thinking about as I was rereading that chapter, is the way compartmentalization works makes everyone who's participating in it kind of innocent.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've thought about this with a friend who's was for a long time part of the intelligence community, and he experienced this where you're only provided a little bit of information, and it literally took him decades to kind of understand that, oh, we seem to be creating all these wars. Weird. But if you only have a little bit of information at every step along the way, you maintain your innocence and your ability to self-justify. And it takes either seeing something really terrible happen that happens to you or to someone close to you, or that you are asked to perpetrate, or it takes decades of time where you just start to see the pattern.
Yes.
Yeah. And so, like with the media, I think most of those people are essentially just compartmentalized. They're doing their job. And so then we could talk about the moral implications of just doing one's job.
Yeah, that's a really interesting thread to pull on. I would say most people would say that it's impossible for 9/11, let's say, to be an inside job because too many people would have to be involved. that many people lying and never coming forward. It doesn't take a lot of people. It really doesn't. I mean, it takes people on the inside. Look, I believe those buildings were brought down by controlled demolition. I believe there was highly energetic explosives, very, very sophisticated, probably only available to, let's say, governmental institutions, let's say. We found evidence of it. There's great papers on it. Independent researchers have found explosives in the dust. These are, nano-engineered substances. And even I won't go into that. But so we have this evidence, but it's not being regarded as legitimate. Who else has to be involved? Well, you would need the people at the top saying, you need to come up with an explanation. And then, look, I've worked with engineers like that. I've worked with like very, very technical people doing things that I eventually discarded when I changed from engineering into medicine, because I saw that these great minds were being used to essentially build machines that are more efficient at killing people. And, that's where I had my wake-up call when I was only 25 or 26. But I see how these nerds, if you will, how they approach things. It's like, oh my God, that problem is so interesting. Yeah, I want, you're going to pay me to solve the problem? Totally, I'm in, man. So you don't really see the whole thing. You just work on this little problem. And that's probably what most of the engineers at NIST were doing. They're like, oh, well, let's figure this out.
Right.
It probably happened this way. Never considering the fact that there's another better explanation out there.
Right.
And go ahead.
Well, I mean, again, this brings it back to, as we've talked about on perhaps some other time, I think we're at this basically human evolutionary stage where we are developing the ability to assess things morally, with like develop a moral sense that we didn't have before, or we didn't have to this degree. And so you have these examples of someone who's willing to just work on a really interesting problem without for money, because that's, people like to work on interesting problems, and without really considering what they are contributing to.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I think what we are moving towards as, developing human beings, spiritually developing human beings, is this idea that we actually have to be aware of the implications of what we work on also.
Yeah. Well, that's a good point. I would also say that, all of those engineers that I work with on defense contracts thought that they were doing the right thing because there's bad guys over in Russia. So
right.
Someone has to protect us.
And so then it's like, this leads to back to this conversation about compartmentalization, where when we have poor information or compartmentalized information or information that's been deliberately obfuscated, then it's very hard to tell what the correct thing to do is.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. It's, if you think you're doing the right thing, why would you question your own ethics and morality? So how do you see, you earlier alluded to the idea that these wars aren't what we think they are. We're creating the wars. That's a very powerful realization to come to if you're working for the Department of Defense. That's where you have to start examining your ethics and morality if you believe that. And it's tough for people to realize that they've been doing the wrong thing. So, I would say that coming to that conclusion takes a special kind of person if you're in it to begin with.
So when you were 25 or so, as you just said, and
Mm-hmm.
you came to the conclusion, oh, maybe I shouldn't work on this type of work.
That's right.
What was your thought process?
Well, I was very lucky because I only had a bachelor's in engineering, but I was working on some very interesting projects. And the last one I worked on involved building a specialized surveillance system that would allow us to track nuclear submarines under the ice cap.
Mm-hmm.
And most of the real threats, the nuclear threats, they're not sitting in silos in Montana or Siberia. They're underwater. They're on nuclear subs.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why there's such a threat is that nobody knows where they are. And the reason why we don't know where they are is because every nuclear sub captain, as soon as they leave port, we're watching them. They're watching ours, we're watching theirs. They go straight to the North Pole. because once they go under the ice cap, you can't track them anymore. So
Wow.
that was the advantage that we were trying to offer to our government, is like, oh, we may have a unique way of using active sonar to track submarines under the ice cap. So here I was, 25 years old, literally on top of the world. And, I was up there for 7 weeks, and I was camping out on a chunk of ice. And it was a very heady experience. We're trying to get data, and it was going kind of well, not great, but we're doing our very best. And I was like, holy cow, look at this, like, this is incredible. Look where I am. How does anyone get up here? At least at age 25. This is what an experience. And as the experiment was winding down, the ice started to break up, and we had to jump ship, or we had to, collect our stuff very quickly and fly out of there. And it's too expensive to bring all our garbage and equipment home. So we put our computers, our data, and some basic things into these planes, and got out of there before everything broke up. Everything else we burned,
Oh,
and we scuttled. We
yeah.
just sent it right to the bottom of the ocean. It's like, oh, fuck it, we're just gonna, excuse my language, we're just gonna drop
Right.
this. And I distinctly remember looking across this absolutely pristine ice floe and seeing this black smoke coming out of the from a pyre,
Yeah.
a garbage pyre. And that's where I was like, whoa, what am I doing here? What are we doing? Really? This is what I'm supposed to be doing at age 25? And where am I going with this? And within, I would say, a month after returning stateside, I was like, okay, I'm leaving. I'm going to start taking classes so I can apply to medical school,
Mm.
which is another compartmentalized institution. It has its own problems if you
Right.
aren't aware yet.
Okay, so because you've had now, 2 careers to really observe this phenomenon, which is some people will essentially see these patterns as they emerge, and other people won't. And they're patterns about like how much we trust what's being told to us, and what's actually going on behind the scenes, what's being compartmentalized out of sight. Since you've had this opportunity now for, as I said, 2 careers, what can you characterize what you think causes someone to be willing to see it or not?
It's a very good question. Um,
Because it's obviously not intelligence. We know that there's a lot of us, many, many high
Obviously,
IQ people who don't. No, there's many, many high IQ people who don't see it or don't want to see it.
yeah. Well, I've given this some thought, and I would say, as a physician, um, and using the real world experience of the COVID pandemic, and most doctors just went along with what the CDC was saying and
Yeah.
never questioned it. And only a few of us said, "Hold on a second, there's a problem here." And why was it that only a subset actually stopped and said, "Are we sure we're doing the right thing?" And for me, I would have to say that it is, if you have never questioned the guidelines in your career, you've always done what the guidelines say. The guidelines are very important in medicine because, honestly, we only have a vague sense that we're doing the right thing. In some instances, we know this is the right thing. In other instances, it's like, well, these are the guidelines. We don't really know what to do, but this is what the experts have said in my field.
Yeah.
And it's not just the fact that they're reasonably trustworthy as guidelines, but if you don't follow the guidelines and something happens to your patient, you're screwed as a doctor,
Right.
because you are not have any ground to stand on in a courtroom when the family of the loved one that was injured by your prescription or your approach, what are you going to say? Well, the entire establishment says that you should have done A, but why did you, Dr. Setty, choose B? So the guidelines are extremely, we call them guidelines, but they're way more than guidelines.
Right.
So unless you've had the experience where you are looking at a situation as a physician, you say, you know what, most people would do this, but in my gut, I feel like, I've never really believe the data behind this and it's incomplete. And in this situation, I'm going to actually do this instead.
Mhm.
And it's very, you have to have a strong sense of clinical judgment, and a good understanding of the, as you said, the deficiencies or the blind spots in the guidelines in order to put your neck out there. So that could be one possibility, is that you have to have some experience successfully challenging what the orthodoxy would have done.
Right.
And
And
as I would say, most younger physicians have never had that experience, especially now. It's become even more formulaic in the way we approach patients.
and that actually, so again, I'm interested in like personality factors. And so one of the personality factors you're describing is sort of a willingness to, question or speak up to authority. And um, because in order to get through engineering school or medical school, things I never did, of course, it requires being willing to tolerate being told what to do for a long period of time.
Hmm.
Some people can handle that better than others.
True. I would say doctors are incredibly good at following rules.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a different paradigm to break out of.
And
Um,
and so on some level, I feel like they are not arbitrary rules, but they are rules where you might not understand the purpose. So I understand the purpose of having a 35-mile-an-hour speed limit on a winding back road. That makes sense to me because I can feel my reflexes maybe require that, and other people's reflexes then require it. So those are rules I understand. But if there are guidelines for a doctor that you don't necessarily understand the source of, then it's much harder to decide what the appropriate action would be. Right? Does that make sense?
yeah, it does make sense. I think you're getting at a problem with medicine compared to other sciences, which is, the reality is, let's say I want to prescribe a medicine for you. What dose do I pick? Well, it's sort of like, whatever, you're, 55 kilograms. And so as an anesthesiologist, I'll say, oh, I'm going to start here with this dose and then titrate. Now, that dose, let's say, and we can say this for all medicines, is based upon a Gaussian distribution of how people react. In other words, the normal curve. And so
Mhm.
we're dosing it, boom, right there in the middle, right? That's, of course, that's what you do. Do you
Yeah.
realize that most people are not there? Like, most people are either on one side or the other.
Right.
So in medicine, we're always like hoping we get it close. You know, I'd like to tell you a story about uh, my move into anesthesiology, because I at the end of my 4 years of medical training, of medical school, I was very unhappy with where I was,
Mhm.
and I decided to pursue internal medicine. And I was halfway through my internship in internal medicine where I was like, this is ridiculous. We're not helping anybody. Nobody's getting better. They're not even taking the medicines that I'm prescribing them. I had a little clinic, and they're like, oh, they're not getting better. It's like, well, doc, don't be so naive, Madhava. They're not taking the medicines. You don't have to prescribe another one. It's like, they're not even going to take the medicine. And so I, in fact, was calling up my friends back in engineering, and I said, look, I'm done. I have to, I got to get out of this field. And then a very close friend of mine from medical school said, Madhava, you should maybe consider anesthesiology, because it's very quantitative. You're dealing with one patient at a time, a lot of physiology. It's right up your alley. I had no idea what I was doing, but I decided I was going to switch.
Mm.
And I started interviewing at residency programs in anesthesia, and I was very lucky that the person I interviewed with at the University of Pennsylvania, where I ended up doing my training in anesthesia, was a very thoughtful anesthesiologist. His name was Frank Murphy Jr. He passed not long after I interviewed with him.
Mm.
Um, and I told him my predicament. I said, look, I don't know what we're doing, and I don't even know if this is right for me. And he knew about my background. And he said, look, Madhava, you're an engineer, right? And I said, yeah, I'm an engineer. I'm always an engineer. In engineering, you need 3 sig figs. A
What's
sig
that?
a sig fig stands for significant figure. And what that means is that in science, saying that something is 1 inch long means something very, very different than saying it's 1.000 inches long,
Yeah.
right? Because now you have identified the level of accuracy that goes to 1,000th of an inch. When you say 1 inch, there is some leeway. It's like, yeah, it's 1 inch as far as we can measure. If you say it's 1.000, you've now measured it to a much higher level of fidelity. So he said, okay, in engineering, you need 3 sig figs. In physics, you need 6 sig figs.
Hmm.
In other words, to be very precise, to measure the energetics, you need to have 6, beyond the decimal point. But in engineering, you just have to get it within 1,000th of an inch, and it's going to fit together. It's engineering. It doesn't have to be perfect. It has to be close enough. In medicine, we're just trying to get the sign right.
Really?
And it's true. It's like, I'm not going to be able to quantify how good this worked upon you as an individual. I just want to make sure I'm not hurting you,
And so this was your advisor's pitch as to why you would like it?
Yeah, no, not why I would like anesthesia, but he's like, look, this is what we're dealing with. We don't know.
Uh-huh.
We can't quantify. Like you're coming at it as an engineer saying, boy, you can't help anyone. Nothing really makes sense.
Oh,
It's like this is the human body. Everybody's different. We've just barely plumbed how our bodies work. We think, this is the hubris in medicine that I'm always fighting out against. It's like, we really don't know what we're doing. I mean, if you can't even you're just hoping that you get it right. I mean, like, look, how many billions of dollars do pharmaceutical companies spend to prove that their molecule works better than a placebo?
right.
Why? Because the placebo effect is very strong.
Yes.
A mind that believes it's going to get better has a pretty good chance of getting better. And you have to prove that it's something more than that. How does the placebo effect work? We don't even know that. We just know that there's a placebo effect. And, don't tell me about all this, woo-woo stuff about the mind-body connection. But yet we acknowledge that, yeah, there's a placebo effect. We don't know why.
Do you know how long, I don't know the answer to this. Do you know how long whatever conventional science has measured against the placebo effect, at least in medicine?
I don't know. That's a good question. I would imagine
100
longer.
years?
Uh,
Less?
Let me think about that. 100 years ago, we had a different,
Right.
entirely sort of different medical profession, right? We had all kinds of other practitioners who were not influenced by, let's say, the petroleum industry,
Right.
and so things were a lot different back then. There was, less standards, I would say, of proving the utility of an intervention. But I would say probably since the beginning of the 20th century.
Mm-hmm.
But anesthesia is another one of these incredible mysteries. Interestingly, I know that's another chapter in the book. It's like we don't know what the mechanism of anesthetic gases are. It's the oldest class of medicine that we're using right now, inhaled anesthetics. Very simple molecule compared to the molecules that we use for hypertension or whatever. We're just talking about a molecule it's like a hydrocarbon, like ether, with a couple of different components to it. Tiny, tiny molecule. We don't know why it puts people to sleep.
Right.
So like already I'm like entering a field where it's like the whole thing is kind of like we're hand waving. I mean,
Yeah.
we know what to give, we know what the concentrations are that will keep someone asleep, but we don't know why it works.
Yeah.
So of all the fields to go into, I went into one where it was like we don't even know what we're doing now.
That is very interesting. Um, the other thing we were talking about this week, I don't know if you want to mention, is this space object.
Oh, the space shuttle.
Do you want to describe what you think about it now?
It's a very, very interesting thing. And, here's, I think it's a really cool topic to pursue. So Brooke is referring to 3-eye atlas. And there's a whole new nomenclature that had to be invented for this thing. The first thing I want to say is the most stunning thing about this object is that it's not from our solar system. And, if you're not even interested in this, or you have not heard about this, my first question would be, how do you know it's not from the solar system? Like, but the solar system is pretty damn big, and it goes way beyond Neptune. How do you know it's not from here? Well, we know this for a fact based upon its velocity.
Mhm.
It's moving so fast that we know that the sun will not be able to bring it back into its gravitational field. Eventually, it's going too fast. It's got too much kinetic energy already. So it could not be brought back, which also means it could not have arisen from here,
Huh.
unless we imparted a tremendous amount of energy to it. But we didn't. It's some object that's like flying through the solar system. And so the next question would be, is like, well, do these things come through here all the time? Well, conventional astronomers will say, well, no, but we probably have been missing them the whole time, which is why this object is called 3I Atlas. Atlas stands for the observatory in Chile that first identified it. I stands for interstellar, and 3, it's because it's the third object that we've identified as being interstellar. And interestingly, the other 2 have all appeared in the last few years.
Wow.
And so is it reasonable to say that we've been missing him until recently? Well, our cameras are better. Our image processing is better. We have better telescopes. So yeah, of course, we're probably, we've just been picking them up. That's what they're telling you. But if you go and look at the number of objects, like newly discovered objects that we discover every month or every year, it's pretty much the same number going back 25 years.
Oh, really?
Yes. So if our means of detection are better, why aren't we discovering more things every year? We're not. Right. It's the same number pretty much. So that's something to consider.
Yep.
But moreover, the thing about this thing is, if you go anywhere, any conventional website, Wikipedia, they describe it as an interstellar comet.
Mm-hmm.
What's the definition of a comet? A comet is a ball of rock and ice and gas that orbits the sun. This thing is not orbiting the sun. Why are you calling it a comet? Like, where's that? Why are you deliberately misdirecting or misclassifying this thing? It's like, is it a fair error, an innocuous error, or is there some level of misdirection? Like, it's just a comet. It's an interstellar comet, but it's a comet. No, it's not a comet.
This is how words get redefined. As we saw many times in the past few years.
Well, yeah,
a comet now does not necessarily orbit the sun.
Correct. And it could be that, but they have not sort of changed their definition. They still call, if you go to the NASA website and say, what's your definition of a comet? They'll tell you exactly what I just said. So why are you calling it an interstellar comet? There's no such thing. Oh, well, whatever. It's convention. It's not convention. This is an extremely non-conventional object. I'm sorry. The other part of this is that not only is it moving very fast, its trajectory is very, very what's the word I'm looking for? Hyperbolic. In other words, it's not sort of circling the sun and then it's going to move out like this. It's going right through. It misses the sun by about 140 million miles. Mm-hmm. And that seems like a long distance. It's greater than the distance between the sun and the earth. But from a cosmic sense, that is like almost a direct hit. It is, especially if you go back and you look at where could this thing have come from? And it's coming from just under the southern hemisphere, the ecliptic, if you will. In other words, if this is too technical, are we going too technical?
Please keep going.
Here's the solar system. What's wrong with StreamYard? Okay, I go left means right. So this is the sun. It's like a flat disk, right? It could have come from any direction. It's hitting it pretty much like edge on.
Yeah,
it could happen. Totally, it could happen. And it's coming from an area like when we try to navigate what is our location. It's relative to the constellations around us. So Sagittarius is over there. That's where it's coming from. So that's how we sort of define it. It's coming from the area of Sagittarius. what's over there? Like, what could have redirected this object towards us? The nearest thing is a star called Ross 154, and it's about 10 light years away from us.
Uh-huh.
So if the closest thing that could have redirected this object towards us is 10 light years away, that's the equivalent of, say, a bullet
Yeah.
0.3 inches in diameter, say from a Mauser 30-06, being fired and hitting a bullseye directly, like right smack dab from a distance of about 3.5 miles away.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
It was like ping, right towards us, and it was moving at. This is the other important point to make, is that it was already moving towards the sun at with that kind of velocity, that direction, and that speed. Not as fast as it's going now, but pretty fast. What are the chances? I
Right.
mean, of course it could happen. It's, coincidentally, maybe it's possible.
Yeah.
And this is where sort of the siloing of the way you think as scientists. Astronomers are like, well, there's no other explanation, so that's what if it's directed from a non-human intelligence? Oh, that's ridiculous. It could never be that. And
And do you think it is? I mean, what do you think right now, based on the information you have?
well, I would say, in order to be very, very what's the word I'm looking for? Objective and clear about things. What surprises me most is that this is not generating more excitement in the scientific community. If you go onto Facebook, you'll see all of these posts like, "Oh my God, it's sending out signals and it's from another planet." We don't know that for sure. And let's be very clear here. Whatever NASA knows, they're not going to tell us everything, especially if it's something that is, revelatory. They're going to think about, like, well, how do we let the public know about this? So that should be of note to you, is that, in my opinion, there should be more excitement about the fact that it's interstellar and it just missed us barely.
Mhm.
Now, what was the other question you asked me? I was going to say something else about this.
Well,
Um,
what do you
what do I
think?
think? Okay.
Yeah.
So let's look at the distortion. This is where we have to sort of make sense of this. It's like, we don't know. We're not astronomers. We don't work at NASA. We don't have access to this. But you have this community that's calling it a comet when it's not.
Yeah.
They're not being excited about the fact that it just barely missed us, and there's nothing back there that it could have been much further back. And then, when you say, well, could it have been from a non-human intelligence? And immediately it's like, no, that's impossible, because we know that couldn't have happened. Okay, so I would say most scientists would agree that there must be life out there. There has to
Right.
be. There's something called Fermi's paradox, which is, if there's that many, if it's so big, how come there's no signs of extraterrestrial life out there? It's like, well, we know there's no signs of extraterrestrial life except for this thing that's just missed us. We're going to exclude that as a possibility. So that's the distortion in the way people think about this. It's like, they would have to admit that there's more likely non-human intelligence out there than not,
Mhm.
but yet we're not going to even consider that possibility.
Right.
Like, where's the sense making here, people? Just explain
Right.
it to me. So that's the way I would regard this object.
And you were also pointing out these AI generated YouTube channels that are cropping up around this topic.
This is huge,
Yeah.
honestly. And yes, so there's one outspoken person. He's a astronomer at Harvard University named Avi Loeb, and he's been talking about the fact that this could be some sort of probe, or it's some sort of alien intelligence, and he's being laughed out of the
Mhm.
scientific community. And he's given a couple of interviews starting in July, when he first started talking about it. But then there's a YouTube channel that has the name Avi Loeb. Boy, I forgot what the whole thing is, and it's him basically like dropping these truth bombs about this object. And some of them go a little too far, I think, for an astronomer. But then if you scroll down into the description, you see that whoever platformed this said this is actually not Avi Loeb. It is a a synthetic version of him, and we have no affiliation with Avi Loeb or NASA, or we're just here. We're just doing it for educational purposes. And Brooke, we talked about it offline before, but I think it's very concerning.
Yeah. I mean, and so Madhava sent me these channels a couple days ago, and I looked at them, and it clearly, what we discussed this already, but it appears to be this protocol, which is somebody who has an agenda, who's anonymous in this case, wants to develop a channel with a lot of following. And the Avi Loeb Space channel, which was, launched in July, actually it launched with 3 months of gynecological videos, which were AI generated, targeted at what I would think is a target audience of middle-aged to older women. And then a month ago, it switched to Avi Loeb synthetic AI talking, and people who are commenting seem aware that it's AI generated, but it is high quality video. Like
Mhm.
if you were to just watch 1 second, you wouldn't be able to tell. You have to actually watch it. And so, my question to Madhava, which we haven't actually discussed offline, is: did you watch enough of those videos to see what they're trying to express through Avi's likeness?
Not enough to really comment.
Yeah,
I was more concerned by the fact that they were using his likeness
yeah,
to put something out there that, I would say would resonate with people who believe this thing is, extraterrestrial,
right.
and it makes them feel really good. It's like, oh, here's a scientist saying it. Look, he's saying it, and it's you're succumbing to confirmation bias, right?
Mhm.
You want to believe it, and now you hear something and you just accept that that must be true.
Yeah,
But my real concern about this is that, first of all, you know, a friend of mine reached out to Avi to ask him if he's aware of this
mhm,
and if he's complaining about it, and we haven't heard back from him, or at least I haven't. But the other concerning thing about this is, the way I see this going is, I feel like you could sort of say that these people are trying to get YouTube hits, and so they're taking advantage of the situation and making something very sensationalistic. Um, but at some point, and they're admitting that it's not really Avi Loeb. But I mean, we can see where this is going to go, or potentially where it's going to go. There's going to be some sort of, I would say, deep state, perhaps, that will put out things like this without acknowledging that it's not the person that they say it is,
mhm,
to see how it goes.
right,
And obviously, they have better technology than what they're showing us on YouTube. I mean, I think they can make a better job constructing Navi Loeb lookalike.
right,
And then what happens next? If the person they're impersonating comes forward and says, "Hold on a second, that's not me,"
right,
what do we do now? How do we know that that guy is not? Who's real here?
right.
How
Yeah,
do
and this is, yeah, I mean, as far as I can tell, it's been this year that everyone has started using AI and
Right?
finding it useful. Like I use it to process, spreadsheets that I don't want to mess with myself
Yeah,
because I don't want to spend 3 hours on something that'll take 15 minutes now.
yeah,
But yeah, now we all are facing this idea that our likeness can be
correct.
misused.
So I think the next stage will be when it becomes hard to distinguish authenticity from synthetic.
Right.
What are we as the collective going to be left with? We would have to be faced with the reality is that we actually don't know what the truth is, which,
Right.
as you probably know, that's sort of the objective as stated by the CIA some time ago. It's like, oh, we know our job is done when nobody knows what's true or not.
Right.
So then what is the next stage? Well, I would say when people come to that place of saying, holy cow, I don't even know what's real. I don't know what to trust. That's when they sort of bring us back in. It's like, oh, look, yeah, we know the problem you're having with this independent media out there. Come back to the NPR, the NYT, New York Times, CNN. It's got the stamp of authenticity on it because you can't trust what's out there. It's all fake. So, like, I sort of see like this could be their way of saying, okay, we've sort of lost control of the narrative. Our biggest weaponry, as I said, the biggest conspirator in the 9/11 stuff was mainstream media. They've lost control. I mean, obviously, the biggest podcasts and the biggest media platforms are not even Fox News anymore. It's the independent stuff. They've lost control of where the populace is going for their attention. And this is, I think, a ploy to bring us back in. It's like, well, we don't know what to believe out there, but maybe we have to go back to CNN.
Right. And I mean, I have my doubts that that'll happen because I feel like so many people, and they're not the ones who are, in academia, of course, but so many people have decided they just don't trust the story anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the most thoughtful discussions we should be having right now, and very few people are how do you tell by yourself, like what's going on, right?
Right.
As opposed to who should I trust? Who should I trust? Like, wait a minute, hold on a second. Like, let's be
Yeah.
very, very clear here. Before you jump to who should you trust, realize that when you decide to trust someone, that's your choice.
Yeah.
So you're trusting yourself first. That's the first step is like, I trust myself to make the right decision about who to trust. So that's where we should be working, really, is like, how do you develop a better sense of intuition or non cognitive knowing and cognitive knowing so that you can make the best guess?
Mm.
And these are the kinds of discussions I think we should be having all over the place.
Okay. So, what do you think we should do? How do I develop a better sense of non cognitive or cognitive knowing?
Okay. So, the first thing I would say is the very first step is to identify where you're biased. And that's not so easy. But notice when you are discarding something prematurely. How do you know it's premature? Ask yourself, can you articulate the counterfactual position accurately?
Yeah.
Or are you just assuming what that person is saying because you're believing source A and you know what source B is saying because source A told you what source B is saying? No, you've got to go and look at source B, the whole thing, and say, well, I know, I know it's source A, so I'm not going to waste the time. Okay, that's a problem. Okay, that's a very, very deep problem. You have to go to the source first and see what they're saying because many people, like, your audience knows Paul Offit probably, right? He's a big vaccine spokesperson. He's telling everybody what Bobby Kennedy is saying. It's like absolute lies. Like Kennedy didn't actually say that. That's not in his book. So you have to go read the book first, right?
Right.
But then he tells you, well, you shouldn't read the book. It's a waste of your time. So no, just read the book. I mean, listen, you have to do that. And I think it's really important to be able to say, okay, argue the opposite point, please. Can
Right.
you argue it, or do you just have a limited understanding of what the opposing position is? If you can't do that, then you're not doing enough work, and it's
Yeah.
unfortunately it just takes a lot of work. Are you believing that source because there's more people that believe that source? Is that
Mhm.
generally what it is? This is a huge distortion, right? I mean, this is, I would say, probably the biggest distortion during COVID is that people aren't experts,
Right.
right? And then even if you say, look, here's an expert, here's a Merrill Nass, a Robert Malone, a Peter Corey, very, very, credentialed physicians who held an opposite position. Why don't you believe them? Well, it's because most people don't believe them. I'm going to go with, most people believe this group, and there's more of them.
Yeah.
Okay, I call that presumptive legitimacy of the majority.
Right.
Could be right, right? But whenever there's a huge um, upheaval of a paradigm, it's always the minority that was right first. How do
Right.
you know you're not in that position right now, right?
Right.
And so now you could start using more, I would say, intuitive aspects to decide. For example, the very first thing is you have to know that there's an expert that is opposing the orthodoxy. If you don't know there's an expert, then you just think, well, everybody does that, right? You just have to follow the science and trust the science. So that's their first ploy. If you want to keep people entrenched in a paradigm that's wrong, is that you eliminate the dissenting opinion from the table. But if you happen to realize that there is a dissenting opinion coming from an expert, how now do you decide which expert is correct? You have to first acknowledge that you don't know,
Right.
based upon what you know, who is more right, let's say. So does that mean it's hopeless? No, it's not hopeless. There are other things now. Okay. What is the tone that they're using? That's very important, right? I mean, because if you let's say you're the expert and you're trying to talk to someone who's not an expert, how would you approach that person?
Right.
Right. If you had no hidden agenda, you would say, look, I understand that you don't understand all of this, but I'm here to explain what I think is going on. And this is why I believe it's true. Or you could say, look, are you going to try to play doctor today? Like, where's your medical degree? Like, why aren't you
Right,
trained?
right.
Okay, but
Yeah,
that doesn't mean that that they're right. It says, but ask yourself, why would you believe someone like that?
yeah,
Because inherent in that is someone who is basically saying that no, you're not smart enough to actually understand this. Let's just come. Versus someone who's saying, no, look, I think you can get it if you stick with me. I
yeah.
believe you have the capacity to understand what I'm saying. Who are you going to believe? Up to
Right,
you. There's no right answer here. This thing, there's no certainty here, but huge distinction. Which expert is dying to debate it openly, and which expert is saying, no, we're not going to have an open discussion because people might get the wrong idea. Look, that doesn't mean that the people who don't want the debate are wrong. But what it does say unmistakably is that if they were wrong, how would they ever know?
yeah,
If they don't want to hear an opposing opinion, they could be wrong forever.
right.
You want to go with that group? Go ahead. But notice that that's what you're doing. How about this one? If, like we just said, we go with the majority of experts, there's this many experts over here and this many experts over here. I'm going to go with them because
Mhm.
there's more of them. Okay, that's a static view of what's happening right now. There's more, yes, but which way are people moving?
Right,
Are experts over here going there, or are experts over here coming to this group?
right, exactly.
Yeah,
Because we all have the
I would say
heliocentric versus geocentric example in our relatively recent history to recall when experts. um, the other thing I want to bring up is like I think there's a lot of so you process things in a pretty intellectual way, and I think a lot of people process things in a highly emotional way, which is why staying with majority or most of your confirmation biases or sources of bias, I think, could be interpreted as someone who wants to process things based on their emotions, like protecting their emotional state or status quo, as opposed to protecting their intellectual state.
mm,
Your first source of bias that you mentioned in the book was one could gain or lose something by the outcome of changing an opinion. So, for instance, if I suddenly start to think that maybe 9/11 was not, you know, terrorists and airplanes, then I'm losing trust in the government narrative, which is a big deal for a lot of people,
it's a big loss.
and it feels like a betrayal for a lot of people,
Yeah.
and for people who work in various aspects of government, I'm sure it feels like even more of a betrayal.
Yes. Yeah, it's a
So
big thing to give up. I mean, we think about like you have a conflict of interest. You're going to lose a lot of money or make a lot of money. Yeah, that's a pretty big
yeah,
conflict of interest. But losing trust in your trusted institutions is even a bigger ask to go the
right,
other way.
right, and then this other thing, like because our world has become a world of specialization as opposed to generalists, there are very few people who consider themselves to have a generalist sort of capacity, and thus, I think we're much more likely to trust the experts now than 100 years ago or even 50 years ago,
Yeah,
because
we have to.
everything is so much more specialized. I
Yeah.
know that in the beginning of COVID, in the summer of 2020, I went and downloaded CDC data, and I didn't even spend that much time with it, but I spent enough time with it to know that what was being said on the news didn't match up with the data. And so I was like, oh, and I saw censorship on YouTube, and I was like, well, so I know not to trust now.
Hmm.
I don't know what the story is.
Hmm. Hmm.
But
Yeah,
once you kind of are willing to break through and say, oh, the story doesn't line up, then it's just getting over the emotional aspect of being in the minority, I think.
that's definitely true. It's very hard to be in the minority.
Mhm.
Um, yeah. Yep. Um, I think we can all come to, I would say, an uncomfortable realization that using your own wits takes a lot of work.
Yeah.
There's absolutely no way around it. And if people are distracted and lazy, let's say, it's so much easier just to trust the experts,
Right.
right? But you could be wrong. But that's why something like, why doesn't the expert want to debate it, right?
Right.
I don't really care about the opposing opinion, but why don't they want to debate it?
Mhm.
The other way that they're trying to convince us to go with the orthodoxy is they pull up this argument, which is, yes, I know that person over there is an expert and disagrees with all of us, but he's making money on the side. You know,
Right.
he's selling his snake oils. He's trying to get hits
Yeah.
on his YouTube channel.
Right.
It's like, okay, so wait a minute. You guys are representing a $1 trillion industry, and you're saying that this guy's making an extra few $1,000s on the side, and that's your argument? That's
Right.
that's kind of weak. But to go even further to that, it's like, yeah, they're trying to say, look, that person has something to gain. We
Mhm.
don't. We don't get any. Okay, you get to keep your job. Okay, so my point here is look at who has the most to lose by
Right.
saying what they're saying. Do you think any of the establishment physicians had anything to risk by saying you should go out and get your booster? Absolutely. That's what my kids are. I'm boosting my kids. Nothing to lose.
Right.
Imagine if you were a physician saying, guys, you should not take the shot. This person is exposing himself to ruining his career. And your argument is like he's going to go off and start his own health supplement company. No, the man is like or woman is
Yeah.
trying to do the right thing at immense risk to themselves and their livelihood.
Yeah.
Who do you think is more has done the research? That's where it leads, right? It's like that person has looked so hard that he has or she has found that there's a problem, and they feel compelled they're that sure that they feel compelled to risk everything. So here's my point is that you don't have to be an immunologist, you don't have to be a scientist or a medical doctor, but you can notice these things to
Mhm.
help guide you to which expert to believe.
Right.
These are enormous, I would say, pearls in our world today.
You said pearls?
Pearls, yeah, it's a
Yeah.
pearl. It's
Yes.
here
Yes.
I'm offering you
Yes.
this gem of a realization
Yeah.
that we've been ignoring. And we're kind of being programmed to think to to offload sense making to other people.
Yeah. And we're we've been talking over an hour, so I'll let you go in a minute. But I'm remembering something that I noticed a lot during COVID, and that someone else described in a way that I found really articulate, which is often people who worked in the physical world, meaning um, plumbers, electricians, carpenters, they were not so taken in by the class of experts.
Yeah.
And the hypothesis is if you're used to actually solving real world, like physical world problems with your hands, you're much more in touch with your intuition about truth and falsehood. I don't know. I thought that was a fascinating idea.
Hmm. If you're used to working with your
If you're
own
used to
hand-
solving real world, like if you're used to figuring out how to build things in the real world with your hands, not on a computer, you're just more in touch with reality,
yeah.
not computers, not like this virtual thing that we're dealing with right now.
Mm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I wonder if it has to do with the fact that you're solving a problem. Like you approach a
Yeah.
problem and you don't know what the solution is. You've got to find the solution yourself based upon
Yeah.
what you know, and be versatile in your approach,
Right.
right? So that it involves some flexibility in what you think is the right solution because you start working on it and you're like, wow, this is not working. I've got to change my
Yeah.
approach to this problem.
And there's no compartmentalization in that kind of situation. If you're a carpenter, you're mostly working alone and you're figuring out how to solve things alone.
Mm-hmm.
So as opposed to, I can imagine, a, a team of biomedical engineers who are working on the next pharmaceutical have some level of compartmentalization to what they're working on.
That's an interesting point. Yeah, I think there's probably truth to that.
Mm.
And I also think we can't extract the reality that people who, not that tradespeople are poor, uh, but in a general sense, like when I talk, if you go off into underserved communities, they don't
Mhm.
trust the government.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like I'm
Right.
not going to get the shot. I don't even know anything about medicine. I don't know about COVID,
Yeah.
but you're going to tell me to put that in my body? I don't think so because I've been screwed over by you guys my entire life. The whole
Right.
system is rigged against me. You know, you want to know the truth about 9/11? Go talk to your Uber driver. Doesn't matter what country you're in.
Interesting.
Totally. They're like, come on, you guys believe that? You believe that story?
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
I've
keep
never
looking
tried
at
that.
Yeah,
That's
I mean, it's nothing against the Uber driver. I'm just saying that people who see the world from
Yeah.
their perspective see that the thing is rigged against most people.
Yeah.
And there is a lot to lose for someone who's benefiting from going along.
Yeah.
So when you take away that benefit, now you see things more clearly.
Right. Okay. Last question. What are you going to do next? What are you doing next? What are you working on now?
Well, it's sort of under wraps, to be honest with
Oh,
you.
okay.
Yeah, I'm trying to see. Uh, I don't know. I'm thinking about doing something political. Let me put it that way. Um, but I'm just putting together people to explore this possibility,
Cool.
because it seems to me that we're at a place right now where there's enough people saying, "Wait a minute, there's something definitely going wrong here." We've
Yeah.
got this object from another solar system plunging through us, and nobody's talking about it. We have basically a JFK style assassination happening right in front of us on the day before 9/11, which now we have a 5-part series from Tucker Carlson. We have this Epstein file thing coming.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, if you're not there yet, if you haven't started to question what you've thought by now, I would suggest that you tune out and stay comfortable, because it's not going to be comfortable.
Just
And the best way, I think, to really affect change is to use all venues, whether it's like creating a podcast like you've done here, writing your Substack. You should check out Brooks' Substack, which I really enjoy. All the independent writers are there, or do what every American should do if they're not happy with the government. Is like, if your vote is not being
right.
used or counted, or if it makes no difference, then you have to run for office.
Yeah.
So where else are we going to go?
Yeah. It's a very powerful choice, and also challenging. And good. Cool. Should I link to your Substack?
I'll be knocking on your door later, Brooke, for a donation.
Should I link to your Substack or
Yeah,
something
link
else?
my Substack. Yeah,
Okay, cool.
yeah, that's a good place to start.
Okay.
And by the way, I've made my Substack free. I don't believe that I write enough to charge anyone anything, and everybody can leave comments. The idea behind the Substack is to bring together a conversation between people who have different views. So everybody can leave comments, unlike many other Substacks where if you want to say something, you have to pay them $5 a month.
Yeah. Good. Good for you. Thank you.
You're
Thank you
welcome.
so
Thank you
much.
for having me.
Good
Yeah,
to see you again.
you too.
Okay.